Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to our channel, AI Era, Islamic Abrahamic Wisdom. We're so glad you're joining us. If you find value in these conversations, please do subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and maybe share it with friends who'd be interested. Today we're doing a really focused deep dive. We're discussing Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir's work on Hazrat Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, may Allah be pleased with him. And our mission for you, the listener, is to really extract the critical insights on leadership from this research. We're not looking at this as just a biography.
Not at all.
No. The source material treats this history as a genuine blueprint for crisis management. We're examining what the sources call the Abu Bakr standard, a model of governance tested under the most extreme pressure imaginable.
And the goal is incredibly practical. It's about connecting those 7th century principles to the chaos of our world today.
Exactly. We want to understand how deep conviction and moral courage can act as stabilizing tools, especially now when we're facing information overload, social fragmentation, the challenges of this AI era.
I think what's so fascinating is how the material immediately sets up this core idea, this thesis, that really challenges our modern view of leadership.
What's that?
It says that leadership isn't defined when things are good. It's not defined in comfort or stability. It is defined exclusively in crisis.
So when things are predictable, you just need an administrator, not a leader.
Precisely. But when the system itself starts to fracture, when the foundations are shaking, that is the only moment you see a leader's real character. That's when you find out if they can actually lead.
So this whole deep dive is really going to be about exploring that one central conflict.
Yes. The timeless tension between principle and popularity. The sources are so clear that Abu Bakr's time as the first caliph was just one continuous high-stakes stress test. He inherited a society that was, frankly, on the verge of splintering the moment the Prophet Muhammad passed away. Every single decision he faced was an existential one.
And if you look at the history, I mean, the default expectation at that moment was total collapse.
Was.
So we have to figure out how his leadership style, this immediate moral certainty he had, was the key factor. The source argues it was the only thing that prevented mass panic.
And stopped hesitation from becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy of collapse. We're basically looking at moral courage as a strategic asset.
Right. A tool for stabilization.
And just for you listening, as we go through this, when we refer to Hazrat Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, we'll use the honorific R.A.
Or Issachei's John.
Exactly, which means may Allah be pleased with him. And that's key, because that recognition of his moral authority is really at the heart of the standard we're analyzing.
That structural definition of leadership is the perfect place to start. It takes us right into our next section, the testing ground. It really gets to the heart of what the sources call the crisis standard. The core belief here is that leadership is only tested in a crisis.
It's a tough standard.
It's incredibly uncompromising.
Yeah.
It suggests that peacetime, it just reveals your efficiency, your capability.
Yeah.
But crisis.
Yeah.
Crisis is what reveals your conviction. And let's talk about the stakes he was dealing with, because they are so relevant to any large organization or state today. The sources point to 3 forces. First, calm leadership stabilizes things. It's an anchor.
Right.
Second, panic spreads chaos. It creates this feedback loop of fear. But the third one is the most dangerous one he faced.
Hesitation.
Hesitation. The sources explicitly say that hesitation invites collapse.
And that idea right there, treating hesitation not as being careful, but as an existential threat, that is the absolute bedrock of the Abu Bakr standard. Right. It means you have to lead with what the source calls moral certainty. The leader has already fought that internal battle between what is right and what is easy.
So they're not paralyzed by the unknowns?
Not at all. They aren't frozen by the potential cost because the decision is already rooted in a principle that doesn't move.
You can contrast that with so much of what we see today, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. In modern organizations, that fear manifests as analysis paralysis. Endless committees designed to spread the blame around.
Or just waiting for the polling data to tell you which way the wind is blowing.
Exactly. And when society is already breaking apart, that kind of delay isn't neutral. It's an active endorsement of anarchy. You're letting the crisis define you instead of your principles defining your response.
And conviction is the force that pushes back.
It's the stabilizing force. If the leader projects that certainty, it sends a signal of stability through the entire structure. It helps everyone else hold it together.
This is where the history gets really, really challenging. Let's talk about the courage to take profoundly unpopular decisions. This trait, I think more than any other, is what defines great leaders. And for Abu Bakr, it was his defining quality. It was the courage to decide against, overwhelming public pressure.
And this wasn't just, ignoring a few critics on the sidelines. He was making choices that were essential for the survival of the state, even when they were politically toxic and deeply unpopular with his core supporters.
Including his most respected senior advisors.
You've hit on the core of it. The sources give us three incredibly powerful examples of this tension between principle and political relief.
And on their own, they looked like terrible decisions at the time.
They looked controversial, dangerous, reckless. But in hindsight, they saved the entire foundation of the state. Let's dig into the first one.
Okay.
The enforcement of zakat.
The mandatory charity or tax.
Exactly. After the Prophet's passing, a lot of tribes basically said, okay, we're still with you politically, but we're going to stop paying the zakat. It was a massive, widespread tax revolt, but it was disguised as a spiritual negotiation.
And the pressure on Abu Bakr to just let it go must have been immense.
It was huge. His senior companions, his top advisors, were arguing so strongly against confrontation. They were saying, look, we just lost the Prophet, we're surrounded by enemies, we're fractured internally.
Their argument was, let's just negotiate, keep them in the fold for now.
Accept their allegiance now, they said, and maybe we can bring back the zakat later when we're stronger. They were convinced that forcing the issue would guarantee a civil war that would destroy the state before it even got started.
And that's the dilemma, isn't it? The pragmatic path versus the principled one.
It is, and Abu Bakr refused. He stood firm. And his reason wasn't about the money, it was about institutional integrity. Zakat wasn't just some optional tax, it was a pillar of the entire system. It was constitutional. If he allowed a core principle to be negotiated away in a moment of weakness, the entire legal and spiritual structure would lose all legitimacy.
He understood that a principle has to be consistent, even in the smallest things, or it just stops being a principle.
Exactly.
You can see the parallel so clearly today. If a powerful corporation could just decide to opt out of taxes or environmental rules because they could threaten the economy,
the whole system would collapse.
The whole administrative state would fall apart. His decision was a radical defense of the rule of law. He was proving that the rules apply to everyone, no matter how unpopular that makes you.
And that idea, institutional consistency, is immediately put to the test again with the second decision.
The continuation of Usama's expedition.
Yes, and this happened at a moment of just absolute vulnerability. The state had just lost its leader, its center, and at the same time you have the Zakat rebels we just talked about and the rising threat of false prophets.
So the capital city, Medina, is exposed.
Completely exposed. And the overwhelming advice from his war council was to keep Usama's army, which was the best, most experienced fighting force they had, right there in Medina for defense.
It seems like the only logical military decision.
They argued that sending those critical soldiers away on a campaign that was ordered by the Prophet before he died was just. It was suicidal. It was reckless.
And we should be clear about who Usama was, a very young commander.
A young man leading an army full of senior, respected, veteran fighters. To send that army away when the enemy was, practically at the gates, it seemed to fly in the face of all military strategy.
Yet, Abu Bakr insisted. He sent the expedition immediately. Why?
Because the Prophet had commanded it. That's it. This was a direct test of military discipline and obedience to the established chain of command, even after the commander-in-chief was gone.
So it wasn't about that one mission.
It was about sending a message to enemies and to allies. The message was, the system continues. The chain of command is absolute. The loss of one leader does not mean the collapse of the entire structure.
So he was protecting the psychological standard of the military for the next 100 years, not just winning the next battle. He chose long-term discipline over short-term security.
An immense long-term gain purchased with incredible short-term risk. And that brings us to the third and most existential confrontation.
The false prophets.
Yes. This was the ultimate test of the state's internal resolve and its core identity. You had individuals popping up claiming to be prophets themselves, which shattered the spiritual and political authority of Medina.
So this required a zero-tolerance policy, a full military confrontation.
Yes, which became known as the Wars of Apostasy. And it risked immense bloodshed. The danger was that the conflict could consume the state from within, leaving it totally vulnerable.
But again, the principle was non-negotiable.
The sources are clear. He had to do it. You cannot compromise on the foundational identity of the state. He drew an absolute line in the sand, showing that the integrity of the system was worth any price.
Because if the foundation is rotten, the whole building comes down eventually, no matter how strong it looks on the outside.
Exactly.
So if you link all three zakat, Usama's expedition, the false prophets, they weren't just random crises. They were strategic battles over the principles of financial law, military discipline, and constitutional identity.
And the pain of those battles is what protected the architecture of the institution.
This all brings us to that permanent rule that he established, which the source material summarizes so well. It says, leadership must protect principles even when people resist.
That's the core takeaway. It's brutal, but it's necessary.
And the logic behind it is what? That popularity is fleeting.
It's worse than fleeting. It's unstable. In a crisis, public opinion can shift by the hour. A leader who follows popularity is building their house on shifting sand. But truth, or in this case, the fundamental principles of justice and stability, that doesn't change.
And the source has a critical warning here, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It says that sacrificing principle for comfort destroys authority.
It's not just about power, it's about the right to command.
Exactly. Once you show you're willing to trade a fundamental rule for a bit of peace and quiet, you teach everyone that the system is negotiable. You trade long-term legitimacy for short-term ease, and you guarantee you'll fail the next bigger test.
We see that play out all the time in modern politics. Policy gets driven by hourly polling and social media trends, not long-term strategy.
The Abu Bakr Standard argues that that approach completely erodes the moral authority you need when a real crisis hits. The popularity you gain by avoiding the hard decision is the very thing that paralyzes you when you actually need to lead.
Okay, that discussion on moral authority is the perfect bridge. So if the last section was about what he did, let's talk about how he did it. How did he command that authority and execute those plans when everyone was against him?
Right. This is the execution standard. It's the difference between having the right idea and being able to implement it under fire.
And the source of his authority is the first point. Moral courage versus physical power.
Yes, the sources make this really crucial distinction. Abu Bakr didn't rely on intimidation or brute force. He didn't have to.
His authority was just recognized.
It was innate. It came from internal sources. A clarity of faith, a firmness of conviction, total ethical consistency, and this refusal to compromise on the fundamentals. He was commanding because he was secure in the necessity of his decisions, whether they were pleasant or not.
That's such a profound insight for anyone listening, especially if you're in a big organization. This kind of moral courage commands obedience much more effectively than just pulling rank.
It establishes genuine legitimacy.
Right. If your team knows you're acting purely from principle, not for personal gain, not for power, then even if they disagree, they're more likely to comply because they respect the foundation of the decision.
We see so many leaders today who rely on the size of their budget or their legal power, but moral authority is the thing that holds a team or a country together when the institution itself is under attack.
It's the difference between loyalty and just, transactional compliance.
Exactly.
And that moral authority is what allowed for the next step. Decisiveness under pressure.
The period after the Prophet's death was defined by this massive confusion and fragmentation, the fitna. Severe internal strife. Paralysis was the biggest threat.
So in those moments, what was his process?
It was clear. First, he would listen. He listened to the debate, understood the different views, assessed the risks his advisors were presenting.
But
once he had enough information and reached that moral conviction, he ended the debate. Swiftly. He clarified the direction, and he ordered immediate execution. There was no more discussion.
And the danger he averted by doing that was, what, fragmentation?
Yeah.
Paralysis?
All of the above. By acting immediately on the zakat issue or sending Usama's army, he didn't give the opposition time to organize. He didn't give his own supporters time to fall into despair. He replaced debate with motion.
And that establishes a core principle for crisis management.
Delay was treated as danger. That's a vital lesson for today. Think about a cyber attack or a financial crash.
You don't have time for perfect information.
You never do. Waiting for it means waiting until it's too late. The standard says the leader has to use their moral clarity to bridge that gap between not enough information and the need for immediate action. You have to be willing to be 80% right and 100% committed, and act now.
That kind of high-conviction leadership leads right into the next point. Crisis communication. I mean, how did he maintain public trust while making these decisions that cost lives and money?
Through a really rigorous, unwavering standard for communication.
Which was?
Speak clearly and truthfully, without any exaggeration, and, crucially, without emotional manipulation. That's so important in high-stress situations.
Let's unpack that manipulation piece, because today, leaders might exaggerate a threat to justify an action.
Right, they inflate a crisis or downplay security risk, and when things calm down, you've burned all your trust.
Yeah.
And manipulating emotions, that creates a very fragile loyalty that shatters the second real hardship arrives.
So Abu Bakr just laid out the stakes, honestly.
Yes. He articulated the principles at stake and why the action was necessary, even if it meant conflict. And the result was this robust structural trust. Even people who disagreed with the decision knew it was coming from a place of conviction, not from some political spin cycle.
That's how you build long-term institutional confidence.
Exactly.
And finally, in this section, we have to talk about accountability. The sources frame this as the ultimate cornerstone of his standard, and it's the thing most often avoided in leadership today.
The standard here is incredibly high. It required him to accept full responsibility for the outcomes, good or bad.
So that means he never blamed his advisors for giving bad advice.
Never. The decision was his, so the fault was his. He never blamed external circumstances or the difficulty of the situation. He never tried to escape accountability.
That is the definition of leadership, isn't it?
Yeah.
Owning outcomes, not sharing excuses.
It is.
Think about that in a corporate setting. When a project fails, the first thing that happens is an investigation to figure out who to blame.
And that incentivizes everyone down the line to avoid taking risks.
Right. But the Abu Bakr standard says the person at the top has to absorb the consequences completely. When leaders own the failures, it creates a culture where people feel safe enough to take principled risks.
And the reverse is true. Shifting blame destroys morale and decisiveness faster than anything. It teaches the entire system that self-preservation is more important than integrity.
All right, let's connect all these dots. Let's look at the strategic payoff. All of these decisions cause so much short-term pain and controversy. How did that translate into a long-term gain for the system?
Well, the sources show that these uncompromising actions are exactly what strengthened the vital institutions that were being tested. So let's go back to the examples. Continuing your Sama's expedition, despite the massive risk that solidified military discipline, it created a professional army that respected the chain of command no matter who was in charge.
And that discipline was the foundation for everything that came after.
It was. And enforcing Zakat, despite the threat of civil war, that solidified economic stability. It ensured the state had predictable resources to govern. It created economic resilience.
It also bolstered the rule of law.
Dramatically. By dealing with those internal threats, he proved that the law was absolute. It wasn't up for negotiation with powerful groups, and paradoxically, that led to more public trust because people saw that the system was consistent and reliable.
So the big takeaway here is that short-term discomfort, when it's born from principle, produces long-term strength.
That's the core concept.
It's so relevant for modern governance, which is so often focused on short-term election cycles or quarterly reports instead of long-term structural health.
Real resilience is built on the hard, unpopular choices you make when you're most vulnerable. That foundation is what lets you withstand future shocks.
But this brings up a really important and fine distinction. We're talking about very decisive, high-stakes actions. How do you distinguish between necessary firmness and just harshness or cruelty?
That is a crucial question, and the sources are very clear on this. Abu Bakr was firm, not cruel. And there's a difference.
Okay, so let's break that down.
Firmness protects systems. It ensures the rules are upheld for everyone. If someone breaks the law, firmness means the consequences applied consistently.
Whereas cruelty?
Cruelty destroys legitimacy because cruelty is arbitrary, it's personal, it's excessive, it's driven by revenge. A system governed by cruelty can't last because people lose faith in the justice of it all.
So that's the essential qualifier. His firmness was always bounded by justice.
Always. He was unwavering on the principle zakat must be paid, the command must be followed. But his treatment of individuals, once that principle was established, was consistent with the established rules of justice, not personal vengeance.
So a system can survive tough punishment as long as people believe it's just and applied fairly.
It cannot survive arbitrary cruelty. That's the critical lesson for any leader with significant power. You use that power to uphold the structure, never to satisfy personal fear or resentment. That's the line between a principled leader and a tyrant.
Now we get to the essential bridge. This is probably the most important part for you, the listener, because we're taking this historical standard and applying it directly to the crises of the 21st century.
Yeah.
AI, tech, global instability.
Right. We have to translate tribal revolt into tech monopoly.
And delay is danger into digital policy.
The Abu Bakr standard is really a blueprint for regulating any force that threatens systemic stability, whether that force carries a sword or writes code.
So let's start with the first one. The standard demands the courage to regulate powerful interests.
In his time, that meant confronting powerful tribes who wanted to redefine their obligations. Today, the analogy is so clear. It's the challenge of regulating giant tech companies or global financial institutions.
These monopolies whose power could destabilize entire economies.
And the standard says, do not compromise on principle like fair taxation or data ethics or market integrity just because a powerful stakeholder is threatening to bull their business.
So just as zakat was non-negotiable, the social contract with these massive power centers has to be non-negotiable today.
The second point is an absolute resistance to populism.
Which in this context means choosing popularity over institutional truth.
Exactly. A leader has to stick to the data, to ethical consistency, and refuse to be swayed by digital echo chambers or viral outrage.
Even if a decision is demonstrably right for the long term on climate, on national debt, the standard demands taking that unpopular path despite the instant backlash you know is coming.
You have to prioritize the structural truth over the mood of the moment.
And then there's the refusal to surrender ethics for convenience.
Which is so pervasive today, the ability to outsource tough moral choices to technology. You know, unchecked digital surveillance or automated systems that lack transparency.
So if an AI system offers an efficient solution but it compromises justice, like, say, it has a built-in bias in predictive policing, the leader has to reject it.
You have to choose the foundational ethical principle over efficiency. Every time.
And finally, it demands decisive action during digital or economic crises.
Just as delay was danger then, today when a banking system freezes or a supply chain breaks or there's a major cyber attack, you need rapid, high-conviction decision-making. You can't let debate paralyze the response.
The leader has to define the threat, make the call with the imperfect information they have, and execute immediately.
That's the difference between containing a crisis and letting it cascade into a societal collapse.
Let's focus on accountability in this algorithmic age, because that feels like the toughest application. The leaders who deploy these complex tools have to be responsible for the outcomes, even if they don't understand the code.
They have to be. If an algorithm a government uses creates systemic bias or it promotes harmful misinformation, the leader can't just blame the data scientists.
You can't say, the data made the decision.
No. And the definitive statement from the source material is so powerful here. It says leadership cannot be outsourced to data or polls. It requires conscience and moral conviction.
If you deploy the tool, you own the consequence.
You own the consequence. And that forces leaders to actually understand and scrutinize the ethical boundaries of the technology they're authorizing.
We have covered so much ground today.
All right.
From the foundational crises of an early state all the way to the governance models we need for the AI era. It's so clear that these principles of crisis leadership are just timeless.
They are. And if you synthesize that core principle from Zahir Ahmad Mir's work, it all comes down to a profound choice that every leader faces in a moment of crisis. It's that agonizing choice between the easy path of compromise and the hard path of conviction.
And the ultimate lesson from these sources is?
It is this. The leader who chooses comfort loses authority. The leader who chooses truth preserves civilization.
That is a standard that challenges almost every assumption we have about political survival today. We assume you have to be flexible, popular, avoid conflict.
And the standard says that real, long-term survival requires rigidity on core principles and a willingness to be unpopular.
So we want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to explore on your own, based entirely on the demanding implications of the Abu Bakr standard. If the decision makers in your government, or your company, or your industry treated delay as danger, as an act of self-sabotage, and they prioritized institutional consistency over immediate public approval, what immediate crisis facing us today, be it climate policy, national debt, or regulating AI, would require an unpopular but ultimately necessary decision right now? What would that specific principal decision look like, and who would be willing to make it? Thank you for sharing this source material with us for this deep dive. It has provided a powerful, timeless framework for measuring the leaders and the principles we choose to follow. We'll see you next time.